This man held together his winter coat with safety pins to avoid buying a new one. When he died, he left behind just under $8 million. In 2014, a janitor died in Vermont. He was 92 years old. His friends at the American Legion quietly scraped together money to help cover his funeral because they were certain he had nothing. Then the lawyers opened his safe deposit box. Inside sat a stack of paper stock certificates 5 inches thick and a portfolio worth just under $8 million. His own stepson could only manage 2 words, tremendously surprised. His co-workers had no idea. His neighbors had no idea. The entire town of Brattleboro, Vermont had absolutely no idea. This is the story of Ronald Reed, the most important investor you never heard of. But the real shock isn't how much he left behind. It's that almost anyone, including you, could do the exact same thing. To understand how, you have to understand the man nobody ever looked at twice. Ronald James Reed was born on October 23, 1921, in Dummerston, Vermont. Into a farming family with almost no money. To get to school, he walked or hitchhiked 4 miles to Brattleboro. Not 4 miles round trip, 4 miles each way. There was no bus, no car, no other option. In 1940, he became the first person in his entire family to graduate from high school. That was it. That was the full extent of his formal education. He enlisted in the Army and served in World War II, North Africa, Italy, the Pacific. He came home in December 1945 with an honorable discharge and the rank of technician 5th grade. Then went back to Brattleboro, took a job at Haviland's service station, and started pumping gas and fixing cars. He stayed for roughly 25 years. When he finally retired in the late 1970s, doing nothing didn't suit him. So after 1 year, he went back to work. This time as a part-time janitor at the local J.C. Penney. He stayed 17 more years. He wasn't waiting for his life to begin. This was his life. At the gas station, he met a woman named Barbara, a customer. They married in 1960, and that same year, he bought a 2-bedroom house for $12,000. It was the house where they raised their 2 children, where he paid for their college, where he lived alone after Barbara died of cancer in 1970, 10 years into their marriage. He never remarried. He never moved. He never upgraded. He died in that same house 54 years after he bought it. He drove secondhand cars, a Toyota Yaris in his final years. His favorite hobby was chopping his own firewood, which he kept doing well into his 80s. He held his winter coat together with safety pins instead of buying a new one. His lawyer once noticed he always parked several blocks from the office to avoid feeding the parking meter. One afternoon, his co-workers at J.C. Penney looked at the old man in the pinned-together coat and decided he was struggling, so they passed a collection around the store floor. Here, Ron. We all chipped in. He looked at the envelope of crumpled bills and smiled. Thank you, but I'll be fine. And he was. A few blocks away in a safe deposit box sat more money than everyone who had just taken up the collection had combined. Because every single paycheck Ronald Reed ever received across more than 50 years of working life, he did something almost no one else does. But before we get to that, you need to understand where he went every single morning. Every morning, Ronald Reed went to the library, not to sit, not to kill time. He went to read the Wall Street Journal and Barron's Financial Magazine, cover to cover. He borrowed books on investing. He studied companies for hours. He did this not for a month, not for a year, but for decades. He had no finance degree. He had never taken a single investment course. He taught himself using the same public library he would one day leave $1 million to. He started buying stocks in the late 1940s and early 1950s, soon after the war. The earliest confirmed trade on record is January 13th, 1959. He was 39 shares of Pacific Gas and Electric for $2,380, roughly $19,000 in today's money. He bought companies he could understand, companies that made things people needed and would keep needing, companies that paid dividends consistently, year after year, through every kind of economy. Procter & Gamble, J.P. Morgan Chase, General Electric. He spread himself across healthcare, utilities, finance, consumer goods, railroads, more than 95 companies in all. He never sold in a panic. He never chased a trend. He never touched technology stocks. He didn't understand them well enough, and that was his rule. When the market crashed in 1987, he waited. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, he waited. Then came 2008. In 17 months, the S&P 500 lost more than half its value. Banks that had stood for a century collapsing overnight. One of them, Lehman Brothers, was sitting in his safe deposit box. That certificate went to zero. His portfolio, built over 5 decades of gas station wages and janitor paychecks, was in free fall. Real money, decades of compounding, evaporated on paper week after week. He could have sold. Any rational person would have at least thought about it. The newspapers were calling it the worst crash since 1929. And Ronald Reed, an 86-year-old man who had never once sold in a panic, did nothing. He didn't call a broker. He didn't sell a single certificate. In fact, keeping those certificates as physical paper in a vault made selling harder. He'd have had to drive to a bank, then to the brokerage. That friction quietly saved him from himself in every single downturn. He started small, in a rented mechanics bay in rural Vermont. And then he did the one thing almost no investor can stand to do. He waited. For 60 years, he waited. And that waiting, that nothing, is exactly what turned a gas station wage into $8 million. Here's the machine. He refused to interrupt. When the lawyers opened Ronald Reed's safe deposit box, they found a 5-inch thick stack of paper certificates, more than 95 companies, some of them decades old. So how does a man who never earned more than a modest wage end up with $8 million? The answer fits in a single image. Picture a snowball the size of a marble sitting on the top of a mountain 60 years long. Every dividend Ronald Reed reinvested was a fresh layer of snow sticking to it. At first, you see nothing. A small marble becomes a ball. A ball becomes a boulder. And a boulder weighs $8 million by the time it reaches the bottom. Reed never pushed it harder. He simply refused to stop it. Here's the actual mechanism. When the company pays you a dividend, you get 2 choices: spend it or use it to buy more shares. Ronald Reed always bought more shares. More shares meant more dividends next quarter. More dividends meant more shares again. Think of every dollar he invested as a tiny employee, working 24 hours a day. No salary, no holidays, who, given enough time, hired more employees just like himself. That is compound growth, the point where your returns start generating their own returns. At 8% a year, money doubles roughly every 9 years. Not because you added anything, because the growth feeds on itself. Across his entire working life, Reed likely put in less than $270,000 of his own money. The other 70+ million came purely from decades of compounding. The money did the work. He just refused to interrupt it. Procter & Gamble, one of his biggest positions, traded at 22 cents a share in 1962. By the time he died in 2014, a single share cost $60. Before you even count the decades of reinvesting dividends stacked on top. Wells Fargo, another major holding, traded under $1 in 1972. The snowball had been rolling for over 60 years before anyone thought to weigh it. When the estate was settled, it came to just under $8 million. He left $4.8 million to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. He left $1.2 million to Brooks Memorial Library, the library where he had read the Wall Street Journal every morning for free for 50 years. The question isn't what Ronald Reed did with his money. The question is, what happens when anyone does the same thing, including you? Here's where Ronald Reed's story stops being about Ronald Reed. He wasn't exceptional. He had no advantages, no inheritance, no 6-figure salary, salary, no financial education, no Wall Street connections. He had a library card, a gas station job, and the discipline to leave compounding alone long enough to do its work. That is the entire secret. If you're 25 years old today and you invest $300 a month into a diversified index fund at an average return of 8%, by the time you're 65, you'll have around $1,100,000. $300 a month is $10 a day, the price of a coffee and a sandwich. Ronald Reed hit something close to that number on a gas station attendant's wage in 1950s Vermont with no index funds, no smartphone, no brokerage app, just a public library and a newspaper. The money was never the hard part. Most people watching this already understand compound interest. They've seen the numbers. They agree with the logic, and most of them will never start. They'll wait for a better month, a clearer economy, a better opening balance, a sign that the timing is finally right. He died in a coat held together with safety pins. He left $8 million to strangers, not because he was extraordinary, but because he started and never stopped. Ronald Reed didn't live a different life from everyone around him. He just made one different decision. That's exactly what we uncover on this channel, one story at a time.